The Boston Celtics are headed to their second NBA Finals in 2 years. Let's talk about it. Last night, the Boston Celtics swept the Indiana Pacers and are officially headed to the NBA Finals, their second time in 2 years, as stated before. Big shout out to the Boston Celtics. I do want to start this video by giving them a ton of credit. It is hard to go to the NBA Finals in general. It's just hard for teams to stay healthy. It takes luck. It takes a good roster construction. And Boston has done a lot of things to put themselves in the greatest position to be a real contender and make it to the NBA Finals. So shout out to the Boston Celtics. Before we get to the player conversations and the narratives about what's going to happen with Boston and all this and all that, I think we have to start this video by giving a big shout out to the Boston Celtics front office. Before you get to the players, the front office is directly responsible for constructing the team that goes out there to make NBA Finals, that goes out there to win NBA Finals. And what Brad Stevens and his Boston front office did to construct this roster is kind of insane when you look back. After losing to the Miami Heat last year, where Boston struggled heavily, losing the first 3 games of the series and ultimately losing in 7 games, Boston had to make changes, but I was not prepared for Boston to make such dramatic tweaks to their overall roster. They traded Marcus Smart and Robert Williams, which were 2 integral pieces to them having one of the best defenses in the NBA for multiple seasons, especially on their 2022 title run. But they traded both of those guys, and not only did they trade them, but they got better by doing it. To trade for Jrue Holiday, who is just a much better player than Marcus Smart, and then to get Kristaps Porzingis, a guy that is a knockdown shooter. He can average 20 points. He also is a good defender. To get both of those guys into your system, considering the injury concerns with Robert Williams and considering the age of Marcus Smart and his overall contract, for you to flip both of those guys for 2 better players is just insane front office management. And again, teams do not go to the NBA Finals or make it that far unless you have smart people in the front office who are going to make the right moves to either sell at the right time or buy at the right time. And 100% last offseason, that is what Boston did. Now that the roster has been addressed, let's get to the elephant in the room for a lot of people, which would be the playoff run that the Celtics have had. I want to start this off by saying we are not going to have revisionist history about the competition in the Eastern Conference. Boston finished off the year as the best team in the NBA win-wise. They were 14 games better than the 2nd seed in the Eastern Conference, and it was clear all season long that Boston was one of the best teams in the NBA. Their win differential in terms of their plus-minus ranked historically as an all-time team, and they were looked at to be the best team in the Eastern Conference. Now, when you address the competitors fully healthy going into the postseason against Boston, they were not looked at to be up to snuff. Some people might have still picked them because they didn't have faith in the Boston Celtics, and that's fine, but they were not looked at legitimately by a lot of people to be a team that would beat Boston if they had matched up. The Milwaukee Bucks, for the majority of the year, were an inconsistent team in terms of looking like a title contender. They fired their head coach mid-season. They brought in Doc Rivers. Dame and Giannis never looked the greatest offensively together. It still looked very, very good, of course, but in terms of their comfortability, they never really found it. The best version of Dame was always without Giannis. The best version of Giannis was always without Dame for the most part of the season. And then when you look at their defense, which is what they put their identity to back with Jrue Holiday, they lost that identity this year with Malik Beasley as their point of attack defender. And for the majority of the year, Chris Middleton was in and out of the lineup. So headed into the playoffs, people thought that the Bucks might have had a shot, but what made things complicating was Giannis had an injury. So off top, people didn't know what Giannis they would be getting. So a lot of people were not taking them seriously to beat the Celtics, let alone beat the Pacers in the first round, if we're being honest. The Miami Heat, of any team mentioned, the Miami Heat were a fan favorite for a lot of people to pick to beat this Celtics team. And unfortunately, in the play-in, Jimmy Butler got hurt, which weighs into that. But before that, the Heat had not looked great for the majority of the year. They were toggling lineups in and out. They were yet again another play-in team. But their claim to fame as to why they will be the team to beat Boston is because of their sense of familiarity with the Boston Celtics. The fact that they had beaten this team multiple times. The fact that Jimmy Butler had seen success against that defense in multiple series. And people thought that the Heat are one of those teams that sleeps through the regular season, but when it comes down to the playoffs, they play at a much higher level because Eric Spoelstra is one of the best players in the NBA. Jimmy Butler doesn't care about regular season basketball. It's not a narrative. He said this, and that's why they would pick them to beat Boston. But make no mistake about it, the Heat would have been the underdog to beat the Boston Celtics. And once Jimmy went down in the play-in, no one had them beating Boston. So that's number two. The only other teams outside of those main two looked at to be teams that could maybe stun Boston, maybe, just maybe, would be the Philadelphia 76ers, the New York Knicks, and the Cleveland Cavaliers. And with all three of those teams, they all had their own question marks. Joel Embiid missed a ton of time for the Philadelphia 76ers, the majority of the season. So they didn't know what he will look like in the playoffs based off of his injury. When you get to the New York Knicks, no Randall for a very long time. They were playing okay basketball to close out the year. Jalen Brunson is a great player, but again, in a series against the Boston Celtics, people didn't think that roster had enough shot creation and self-creation without Jalen Brunson. And the fact that Boston had the bodies to throw in him on the perimeter, people would have still favored Boston. When you get to the Cleveland Cavaliers, who's a team that they actually played, people didn't think the Cavs had a shot based off how the year had gone for Cleveland. With the amount of time missed, Donovan Mitchell going into the playoffs, not fully healthy himself, and also just how weak the roster is in comparison to Boston. And that's not me trying to shit on Boston. That's me acknowledging how good of a team Boston was for the entire year. So when you see Boston playing these other teams, yeah, that happens because they're the number one seed and they won that many games. When you win that many games in the conference, you decide your fate by winning a lot. So you're going to play easier competition. And even it seemed like the Pacers, who made a trade for Pascal Siakam, which was great, they still were not looked at in year one, especially after the injury that took place to Benedict Mathurin, to be a team that could seriously knock off the Boston Celtics. So with that context, when you look into Boston's playoff run, before you project injuries, a lot of their teams based off the bracket, they were more than likely favored to beat. What people have an issue with is when it actually unfolded round by round by round, most of these teams had their best player or a very important player miss a lot of time versus Boston. In the Heat series, there was no Jimmy Butler. In the Cleveland series, there was no Jared Allen. There was no Donovan Mitchell at the tail end of that series. And then against the Pacers, Halliburton missed the last overall 2 games. And there was also no Benedict Mathurin. So people have an issue with that. And what I would tell you is, I think that's fair. I do think that's fair. But just because we're saying that's happening, that's a part of the run. Injuries are part of every single run. If you look at every title team, for the most part, injuries have to happen, and the battle of attrition is a thing. How do you hold up come postseason time? It's a thing. So to me, I think it's fair to point out in terms of how they're going to compare themselves to a team who comes out of the Western Conference for sure, because I do think the West is a much better conference. But the injury stuff, to me, the part where it has validity is the competition Boston had to play to get to the finals wasn't that great. And while that's true, they still were the best team in the East, regardless of that. So don't tax the injuries that Boston had to play. Tax the conference. That's really what I believe. But none of that matters because the Celtics are now in the NBA Finals. They're waiting to match up with the team from the West. Most likely, it's going to be the Dallas Mavericks, who have taken a 3-0 lead over the Minnesota Timberwolves. I will have a separate breakdown video of that series probably tomorrow or later today, depending on how I'm feeling. But that's what it is. So all this talk about their road, that doesn't matter because now they're in the finals. And it's win or bust based off the moves that they've made, based off the fact that Jaylen Brown is making a Supermax contract and Jayson Tatum Supermax will also be kicking in soon. Boston made these moves not to make the finals, to outright win the NBA finals. And they are now in position to prove that, and they're in position to do so. If we are to assume the Dallas Mavericks make the NBA finals versus the Boston Celtics, this is a series that is very, very competitive. And to be honest, I don't know who the favorite in the series is. Most likely it's going to be Boston again, based off how many games that they've won in the regular season. But ultimately, if we're being honest about Boston's playoff run, they've won, and I won't take that away from them, but they've shown many, many, many moments of sloppy basketball behavior, especially in a sweep against the Pacers, where even though they swept them, how many times did you question the decision making at times from Boston as a unit? They beat them in 4 games, so I'm not going to nitpick too crazy. They did what they were supposed to do. But Dallas is going to be their biggest test. It's going to be the best defense they played all playoffs long, and it's going to be the best offense they played all season long. So for me, this is really the series that's testing how good Boston is. Because the questions people have about Boston is sometimes their willingness to just settle for threes and not attack the basket and not play to their strengths. The question is Jayson Tatum going to perform like a number one option consistently? Because there are moments where people say Jaylen Brown is better. I think that's dumb. Tatum is clearly the best player. But a lot of people do have those moments based off how Tatum can struggle offensively at times. But overall, Tatum is still one of the most versatile players in the NBA. His defense is still at a premium. So in a series versus the Dallas Mavericks, where you have a player like Luka on the other end, who's one of the best, if not the best after Jokic, offensive player in the league, it's like, it's a real test. So I think this is going to be a fun matchup. Again, I don't want to get into dissecting that, but ultimately for the Celtics, your question is, can you get over the hump? And if they fail, if they don't beat them, they're going to get slandered. But realistically, they're bringing the same team back. They extended Jrue Holiday for multiple seasons. Kristaps Porzingis also got his extension there. If you're in the Eastern Conference, there's no need to blow up this team. Tatum and Brown can still continue to get better. And I don't think you make the investments that you've made to say we're going to blow up the roster. I don't think that's the vision of the Boston Celtics. And yeah, those are my thoughts. Let me know what you think about the Celtics. Do you think they have what it takes to win the NBA Finals this year? If you're Boston, do you want to blow it up regardless of the conference they're in? Let me know your thoughts. I will be having more videos coming out. I had to take a break to assess and evaluate some things, but we're here. We're back. Appreciate all the support that you guys give me. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll catch you guys in the next NBA upload. Peace out, people.